Greetings, Quester. The Meddlesome Meeples present Tome Talk with Richard and Matt.
Hello and welcome to Tome Talk. Now today, Richard is going to be talking about a couple of books actually, but not quite part of a series, but set in the same universe.
Yeah, that's basically what it is.
Quite separated by time and possibly space.
Yeah,
this is Iain M Banks, Consider Phlebas, and Use of Weapons. So Richard, tell us something about these books and why we should read them.
Right, well, I wanted to talk about Use of Weapons because that's my favourite one out of the Culture series. That's kind of generally what they call this, because it's about a civilization called the Culture.
And of course, when you told me you were going to talk about the use of weapons on Tome Talk, I did worry about where you were going with this.
Yeah, some kind of samurai instruction manual. Yeah. So yeah, this is actually the third one, you could say, but it's not like a normal series where it exactly follows on. It's just it seems like he just thought of another idea for a book set in that universe, and so he did another one. So I wanted to mention Consider Phlebas because that is the first of the Culture novels, and it was the first one. It was the first sci-fi one that he actually wrote as well. So, just trying to see where that was.
So I don't tend to think of Iain M Banks
1987.
particularly as being a sci-fi author myself.
Yeah, because when he doesn't have an M in his name, then it's more just standard fiction, although still pretty crazy. But yeah, it's more the sci-fi ones. Yeah, he started with Consider Phlebas, and it's about the Culture, but it's a bit of a departure from the Culture series, which is a bit of an odd one to start with, because in this one, the Culture is actually at war. Now, the Culture is a far future kind of utopian civilization where it's basically post-scarcity. The spaceships look after everything. They have these amazing mines on them, and
they gather the resources for humankind.
Well, basically, but they're not doing it for humankind. They're kind of just doing it. They kind of have their own community, and the humans will live on them and things, and basically, they look after humans just because that's the moral thing to do, and the other ships would think they're really petty and narcissistic if they didn't help humans. So
it's a kind of a begrudging aid for keeping up
kind of thing. It's like they're on
keeping up appearances.
They're on like an enlightened plane of existence.
Yeah.
So there's no reason not to care for humans and things like that. But what has happened in Consider Phlebas is that there is this other species called the Idirans, who are quite massive. They're a bit look back like the Lovecraft monsters, really.
Now you've got me interested.
Yeah. So they are very, they're very big and loud and very religious as well. And basically, the Culture is a bit of like an affront to their religion, and they launch a war against the Culture. And then the Culture surprises themselves by fighting back and saying we're not having this, and actually pursuing the war against the Idirans. And that's the context where this book is. And it follows a character called Horza. I think his full name is Horza Bora Gobachol or something like that. It's quite a long, strange name. But he is.
I see why you're not too certain on that.
Yeah. Well, I'm never sure on the pronunciations of any of the names in these books, but I just do my best with them, really. But he is a spy for the Idirans, and he is kind of working against the Culture. So this is another strange thing. He started off the Culture series with someone who is against it. And he has this pretty strange ability where he can actually mimic people's faces. It makes him a really good spy. He kind of puts himself into this trance and concentrates on who he wants to imitate, and then he can do it and kind of take their place. And I mean, he's been doing that for quite a long time for the Idirans, and it's like a space opera odyssey. It follows him across several planets and orbitals. The picture on the front, it looks very strange, but it's like a spaceship heading towards a big ocean, but the ocean seems to be kind of going up into the sky, and that's because it is actually going towards an orbital, so it's not so much a planet, it's a ring, a little bit like on Halo, really. But
a ring of water.
Well, this one's mostly water. I think that's just because they're by the ocean, but there is some little bits of land by the side. So you can basically get a lot more surface area than you would from a planet. And these have become known as the Banks orbitals, these particular ones. And I think what it is the size of it is enough that as it rotates for 24 hours, you get 1 G of gravity from centrifugal force. So there is a particular size for them to be for that to happen. So it's like an imitation of Earth, but way more surface area and way more places for people to live. So anyway, that's just a little thing, and that's what a lot of the culture is actually on.
So we've got this character then who can change his appearance as he goes around. Now, does that mean that we're seeing this war from both sides in that book? Is he, or is it's everything from his perspective?
It's from his perspective, but he just kind of he visits so many different places, and there are scenes that are just like what the ships are saying to each other as well, and ships going on particular missions and things. There is a ship in this book, because like occasionally things will follow on from each other in this series, but it's only like tiny threads. But there is a ship in this that, as part of the war effort, has to destroy, I think it's 3 orbitals, which are going to fall into the Idiran's territory, and they don't want them to have them. So this ship needs to actually destroy them. And then a book, several books later, there's the one called Look to Windward, where the mind that was in that particular ship is now in control of an orbital, and it is racked with guilt over the fact that it did this in Consider Phlebas. So that is one of the things that followed, and it's kind of that thing's kind of, with its massive mind, it's trying to cope with what it did because it doesn't let itself
Guilty
forget.
Ships.
Yeah, and I think it actually, because there were some people that got killed on it, people that wouldn't leave or refused to leave, things like that, and the ship actually sent out drones to like record each death. Like, it didn't want to make it easy for itself, and it's basically been torturing itself ever since. It's very strange.
Very bizarre.
It is bizarre, yeah. But it's just, that's one of the things I love about these culture books, is the fact that the ships do think so differently to us, and they give themselves crazy names as well. I think I did talk about the names at one point, but what I really wanted to talk about though was use of weapons. So one reason I want to talk about Consider Phlebas, or at least mention it now, is because I think there might be going to be a series of it.
Amazon, from what I've heard.
Yeah, I think it's going to be Amazon.
It.
Yeah. And I'm not sure how I feel about that. Cause,
you're not a fan of books being adapted, do you?
Not always. Sometimes it's very good, but if it's a book that I really love,
you don't want it to be messed up.
Yeah, that's basically it.
Because that is quite often the case, particularly with fantasy and sci-fi shows, that they'll be maybe made more commercial, or things that are quite unique in a book will be played down a little bit, because obviously some things work in books as opposed to working on film, and vice versa, so that has to be taken into account. But sometimes it does lose something, and some books like Eragon, brilliant book by Christopher Paolini, the film was atrocious with the exception of Jeremy Irons.
Well, maybe he'll be in that, so
you never know. You never know.
That could save it.
Jeremy Irons can save pretty much everything,
but unfortunately Iain Banks isn't around to kind of make sure it goes on track anymore, so that's a sad thing. But what I really wanted to talk about though was use of weapons. Now this one, actually, he did do a draft of it before Consider Phlebas. So one of the reasons I think this book is so good is that he had 2 full goes at writing it. So like, he wrote it in the early 80s, and it was like incomprehensible. Right. I'm going to explain in a minute why this book does get so confusing.
If it's incomprehensible, should we try?
Well, this is it.
Are we going to try and explain something that's incomprehensible?
No, this one isn't.
We're not Mission Impossible here.
Yeah. This is what this series of Meddlesome Meeples is. Yeah, we're going to explain everything that's incomprehensible. But
so
anyway,
buckle up, folks. It's about to get wild here.
Yeah. But anyway, it didn't get published at that time. And you wrote Consider Phlebas, and then the second one was The Player of Games. That's quite appropriate for us, actually. That's about someone who's like really into like game theory and stuff, and he gets sent on a mission. But anyway,
because there is how many books are there in this series, Richard, altogether? There's quite a few, isn't there?
There is quite a few,
but they don't have to follow them necessarily in order, because they tend to be quite spaced apart in time.
Well, what we have here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 12, but they are the they're just all the sci-fi ones.
Yeah.
And not all of them are cultural ones. Like Against the Dark Background, Fearsome Engine, they're not. But Surface Detail, and then there was also the Hydrogen Sonata after that.
Yeah.
Now that was the last one, so there's actually one more than there is in the list here. But anyway, yeah, I read Accession first. That was my first introduction to it, and that pretty much blew my mind because it's far less human-centered than the others. Like Accession is basically all about the ships, and the story in that is absolutely crazy. And then I read a few of the others and thought, oh, these are a bit more normal. But yeah, use of weapons. He actually, I think he says in the prologue that his friend persuaded him to bring the old warrior out of retirement. That's it. It says, I blame Ken MacLeod for the whole thing. It was his idea to argue the old warrior out of retirement, and he suggested the fitness program too. So that is like rewriting this book.
If you don't like this, if you read these books on the premise of this Tome Talk and you're not happy with it, don't blame me, because I had nothing to do with this.
Yeah.
Richard, maybe a little bit of blame, but
Ken
mainly
MacLeod.
Ken MacLeod is the one you want to...
Yeah, don't even blame Banks for writing it.
Yeah, it's totally MacLeod's idea.
Yeah, so I think just like having another go at it, it's just made it, like, even for Banks, this is a very good book. And the old warrior he was talking about would be Zakalwi, which is the main character in this. Now, he is someone a little bit like Horza, is used by one of the great civilizations. This time it is the culture that he works for. And he describes his job as he fights wars. So it's basically they can send him
soldier,
into a planet.
Maybe we could describe him as
but
more
it's
pithy.
always a different rank though, and like sometimes it's kind of a spy, and they will just send him in to kind of take control of an army.
So more of an operative than anything then.
That's it, yeah, but he'll be there like as a field marshal or something, and it's they will send him somewhere where they can't interfere directly. And because he isn't actually a citizen of the culture, I mean, he's just somebody that they grabbed from a planet. Yeah, it makes it so that they can actually interfere without interfering. Now, he's obviously very skilled as a warrior and everything, but there are a few times in the book where he's tried to stop like being a soldier, and it kind of goes
keeps getting pulled back into the wars.
Yeah. Now, what it is now this is the difficult part. This book, it's basically two stories.
Yeah.
That are going in opposite directions.
Right.
Now,
with two different characters, or is
no,
it
the
still
same
character?
They're both about Zakalwi.
Yeah.
Now, what is happening is there's the story of him being on the actual mission that this book is about, basically. So kind of it's his latest mission.
Yeah.
And that story is going forward. Now, they are in this properly numbered chapters. So section 1 we have the good soldier, and then there'll be 1.
Oh, that's interesting because it's counting down. When you look at Richard's just showing me the contents page here, and the chapters are counting both up and down.
Yeah.
So
you have 1, and then you have the Roman numeral 13 being the next one,
followed by 2 and the Roman number
and then 12,
numeral for 12,
and then 3, then 11. So you've got one story that's counting forward, the other one's counting back. Now, that actually ends up working amazingly because at some point it kind of crosses over, and it's a weird way that it works. But so basically,
it's quite unusual as a writing style, isn't it? Because you can kind of imagine maybe two stories playing out simultaneously, but both moving forward through time.
Yes.
But to have two, with one going forward and one going back in time, again with the same individual. It just seemed odd to be going in reverse. Yeah,
so you've got his mission, you've got like what he is doing now, but you don't really understand much about the guy himself. Whereas you get to each of the new Roman numeral ones, counting backwards, and each time you learn a bit more about him and like what has made him the way he is. He has a few weird phobias, and that doesn't become a phobia. You don't realise why until right near the end of the book, which is like Roman numeral chapter 1, which is like this is where it all started, and you can really look forward to it as you're getting through the book because like there's so many weird things about this guy and I want to know why. And because he did kind of grow up in quite a privileged way. He was an aristocrat on one particular planet, but then he and his step siblings ended up fighting like a civil war basically. And when you get to all that stuff, because that's kind of mentioned early in the book. It's not much of a
Yeah,
spoiler.
we don't want spoilers.
These are not spoilers. These kind of things become apparent, but you realise kind of what a crazy life he has lived. And the Roman numeral chapters are so good because he's lived a very long life. It's like a couple of 100 years, because he's like had genetic modifications. Sometimes he's been frozen, things like that. Sometimes he was dead for a while. You know, it's just sort of kind of weird stuff that happens in the future. But it is just the stand-out bits of his life. So it's like the most interesting part. So each of those Roman numeral counting backwards chapters is pretty amazing. The counting forward ones, they are a bit kind of slower because it's his actual mission that he's doing now, but it's still really interesting because like they've put him on this planet and given him a job to do, but they've also kind of made him a billionaire on that planet as well, and like set up a whole company before he even got there, so he can basically do whatever he needs to do. And it is a very strange it's just a very interesting way that it happens. Now, a few of the characters in it turn up in other books in various indirect ways, and I just think if you were going to start with a novel from the Culture series, I think Use of Weapons is a good one to start at, even though consider Phlebas is the first one. Yeah. Yes, just because for me, Use of Weapons was one of the very last ones I read. And I thought, oh, what have I missed out on once I read it? But you know, a lot of the others are brilliant as well. They all kind of focus on different aspects of it.
So why should somebody pick up Use of Weapons, do you think? What stands out about this book to you?
What stands out about it to me is that it is such a brilliant vision of the future. It's very kind of, it just spans so much in time and space, as you were talking about. And yet it's such a human story as well. And I think people kind of will be able to appreciate the drama in it, but also a fairly kind of mind-blowing scale of it as well.
And the writing style?
Witty.
Quite unusual, isn't it, as well, with the stories travelling backwards in time.
It is, yeah. There is quite a lot of description. Sometimes there'll be like a chapter that doesn't have much speaking at all. Like there was a time when Zakhalway decided he wanted to be a recluse and everything, and that's a very strange chapter to read. But you know, so many different styles just in this one book that it stays interesting. And yeah, like I say, Banks has got a good sense of humour. I mean, for a while I wouldn't really read any novels where the author can't be bothered to be funny. So you know, they just need a little bit of wit in there as well, even if the story is harrowing, and just so they've made the effort.
That's it. If you're going to tell a really dark story, throw in the odd bit of, even if it's dark humour, the odd joke now and then.
I love dark humour.
I do love dark humour.
It feels so healing when you laugh at something like that. Yeah.
So there we are, folks. Richard is recommending both of these, but primarily Use of Weapons.
Yes, primarily Use of Weapons.
And Consider Phlebas, both by Iain M Banks. So, thank you for joining us. Stay meddlesome.
Farewell, Quester. To find out about other productions by the Meddlesome Meeples, then check out our channel or rendezvous with us at meddlesomemeeples.com. Until next time, Quester, farewell and keep thine axe sharp.